Welcome to another traffic guide for the Kamel GT series in iRacing. For this week, we're at Sonoma Raceway. So before we go into the traffic examples, I'm going to show a lap of the Audi first. Now, this isn't the largest field. This is the only replay that I had saved from 2016 Season 4. There were obviously races with larger fields, specifically the race on Thanksgiving Day, which I personally crashed out of, so unfortunately I don't have the replay for that. So there are some good examples here to show, and of course I'll talk about the passing zones that can be made. And let's go to the Audi lap first. So I'm going to go to one of the quicker laps here to show the typical line for the Audi first. So prior to turn 1, you can pass on the inside as the Audi will start wide in his approach to turn 1. This gap will begin to close, so if you can't complete the pass prior to the turn-in point and where this gap will close, you may want to wait and then be prepared to pass on the right. Show your intentions based on your positioning of your car. So as this gap looks like it's going to close, you may want to just move over to the right to show that you are going to pass on the right, so the Audi driver can go ahead and make his move to the left, giving you that space there on the right. And then, of course, you can pass in his braking zone prior to the turn into turn 2. Now, if you can't pass prior to turn 2, it's actually pretty difficult to pass at any point between here and 3A, which is the top of the hill after the next set of turns. The Audi gets off the corner quick here, and you won't be able to get much of a run prior to the next turn-in point. So unless the Audi is running a slower pace and maybe moves over to indicate that he's giving you the driving line, I wouldn't try to force a pass through here. It can be pretty difficult for an Audi that's running at race pace to get around. So you'll see a lot of passes happen at the top of the hill on the inside here of 3A, which is that turn there. So as Audi comes up, and then as he runs wide on the exit of 3A, you can oftentimes come up and complete the pass here on the inside prior to turn 4. Now, if you can't, you're going to be right up on the Audi's tail here. I wouldn't force a pass at any point through this corner. Sometimes the Audi will just run wide and leave you an opening on the inside, but don't expect it, and it may be done by accident, so be cautious trying to pass until the exit of turn 4. And the best spot after 4 will actually be right here, as the Audi will now move to the right. And that's about the same point where you're going to have a run. You're not going to get much of a run on the Audi until he's moved over and you're up to speed and you can now pass on the outside. But be cautious of that, because what can often happen at about the mid-corner point here, sometimes the Audis will drift a little wide here. So be careful about that gap. Could close here on the midpoint here around the corner. All right, so if you can't get alongside here prior to turn 6, is it? Then you may want to wait and pass on the outside. So normally the pass would have been completed prior to this point. If, like I say, it's normally going to be completed further ahead in this corner. But if it happens to be up a little further ahead here, turn-in point is going to start right at about the crest of this hill. So if your gap is closing at that point, wait and then pass on the outside here, and you'll see there's a lot of space to do that. So as the Audi kind of hugs the inside here, you've got all the outside there to pass. And if you can't complete the pass prior to that, you've got a lot of space now on the inside as well. So a lot of different opportunities there based on where you happen to approach the Audi ahead. Now this is another point where from this corner up into the S's, it's a pretty difficult area to pass. And so if the Audi's running at race pace and he hasn't yielded the line at any point or kind of signaled a pass, oftentimes I will be waiting to make a pass from here all the way up to here. And as the Audi will now run wide, this is really the only point you can actually get a run on him, a good run on him, is passing to the inside here on corner exit. And there's a lot of space now here to do that on the right side here. And all the way down into the turn here, you could pass on the inside. Of course, that gap's now going to close as this is now the turn-in point, just past the end of the curbing here. Now, instead of trying to quickly force a pass on the outside here, which you can do if the timing is just right, usually what I see happen is the pass is best made again on the inside on corner exit. So Audi can be carrying quite a bit of speed at this point, and I don't know if I had any examples in this particular replay, but as the Audi runs wide there on the corner exit, there's a lot of room to pass now on the inside. And then finally, after the last corner, you can pass on either side, depends on which side of the road the Audi's running on, but don't assume that he sees you. He may not notice you coming up here as you reach this corner here, and even though he may be wide to the right, he may actually turn into you on the inside of this corner. So be a little cautious here, because you want to make sure that he sees you or that you're alongside him, that maybe his spotter will let him know you're there. So there is a spot where contact can happen if the outer driver's not watching for you to come up here. Be cautious of that. So if he's already ahead of you at this point and he's turned in here, then of course you can now pass on the outside. So there's some room to do that. So anyway, let's go back to the examples now. So I'm going to go to lap 6, where traffic is approached for the first time. I think it's toward the end of here. Okay, so all right, so I think I made a mistake in this first example, and I was probably still learning a little bit about this passing zone here. What I should have done as I approached the Audi was stay to the right to indicate that I was preparing to pass on the right. But I think I went a little to the left, which I'm sure could have thrown him off or confused him. So watch what happens here. Really, I went left, and that's exactly where he's going to end up going. So what's better to do would be to kind of just stay behind him and wait for that gap to open up on the right. And that's where I ultimately ended up passing. But it was awkward. You'll see how I went left, that I had to slow up and then go to the inside. He did the right thing. He stuck to the driving line, and that's always best. As an Audi driver, sticking to your driving line is the most predictable thing to do. If you're trying to get out of the way and move like at the last second, and you're trying to give the line, sometimes being too kind will actually confuse the driver behind and may even result in an incident. So it's better to just be predictable and let the Nissan find a way around. Now, there are opportunities where you can yield the line, but it needs to be done far in advance. For example, on a straight. So if you're on a straight and it's well before a corner or a corner entry point, then sure, you can do that, and it's not going to catch anyone off guard. But otherwise, if it's at a point in the track where changes are going to be made as the cars move across the road on the driving line, it's better to stick to that line, because that's going to be the most predictable thing. So for me, coming up on the Audi here, what I should be watching for him to do is to follow the line, which, as we know, is now going to come across the road to the left. I'm well before I've reached him, and of course I should be another car width to the right, getting ready for this gap to open up on the right. And so that was my mistake there, and I think I did a much better job of that further on in the race here. Now in this case, I wasn't close enough to complete the inside pass after 3A, but I will show an example of that. But this is an example of a place where you can't really force a pass because you're just not close enough. And so at this point, I'm really only catching him by the turn-in point of turn 4, and he's already in his braking zone. I'm just getting to my braking zone as well. The Nissan braking zone is also right here before the end of the curbing. And so what I'm going to do is just check up and wait for him and see what he does. So if he's following the driving line, he's going to turn in, and most likely, if he's running race pace, then I will pass him after the corner. But I'm going to watch and wait to see what he does first. So he runs wide. He hasn't turned in yet. So I'm going to notice and recognize that and then go ahead and take the inside line. But I actually would rather that he ran the line at pace than leave this bit of uncertainty, because I've made passing moves like this before where it looked like the Audi was going to go ahead and just run wide and yield the driving line, but then he made a sharp turn into the apex at the last second, and he was just running slower pace, and it just threw me off. And I thought he was doing what this Audi driver's doing, which is running wide and yielding the line. So that actually makes me more nervous that he does that. I'd rather that he just runs the driving line and actually wait until after the corner to make the pass, because it's more predictable. And this is the point where I mentioned it's difficult to pass through here. You can see how quickly the Audi gets off some of these corners here. Notice my my distance here at this point, and he's going to pull away from me here. Much quicker off the corners in some of these areas. And so at this point, I wouldn't force a pass in the first corner of the S's here. I would wait, as I showed earlier, till that second corner. So what I did there was, I think I was timing the exit and to get to get a lot of speed to the inside there. What I did again is I ran a little wide, and I'm learning that that's going to confuse the Audi driver ahead. I'm thinking more about my line. I'm thinking about, oh, okay, I want the inside line, so I'm going to get ready to make a run through it. But as I'm looking at this, I'm thinking, wow, it's actually it's going to confuse the car ahead, and he might try to actually stick to the right because he thinks I'm going to make a move to the left. And really, it would have been, again, much better for me to just stay right behind him, wait for him to move on off to the left, and then make my move to the right, rather than try to get the optimal amount of speed through the corner here, which is what I was setting up to do. Luckily, he still stuck to his line, and I can see how that would have potentially thrown him off. So I'm trying to do a better job of that, recognizing that. So on the exit here of the final corner, there is room here to pass now on the inside, but this is the instance where I get a little bit nervous about whether or not the Audi actually might make a late turn in to that corner. So approach this situation cautiously. He stays plenty wide, and so I feel okay going through that. But I would urge caution in just keeping a close eye on that. If you start to make a turn in, get ready to brake and then go around him on the right if he does that. All right, so we're going to move up to lap 13. So this is the outside pass around the long carousel turn here. Okay. So if there's another Nissan driver ahead, what I'll usually do is check up and wait to see what he's going to do first. And this was actually lap traffic, and often situations like this, the Nissan driver will check up and wait for you to make the pass as well. And so I wanted to make sure that whether or not he was going to pass or not. And so I was just kind of being cautious here and waiting to see what would happen here. So he does have the inside here prior to this turn-in point. But what happens when you try to run an awkward line that sometimes is you end up running wide because you're braking and your turn-in point is thrown off a bit. So he runs wide there. And now this is the outside pass I mentioned earlier, where you've got to be careful right about this mid-corner point, because what can sometimes happen is the Audi driver will sometimes run a little wide, and that's not intentional. It's just where his momentum is kind of carrying him a little bit. And so what I would actually recommend doing is staying a little extra wide here in case that happens. Like I say, it's not intentional. It's really just where the momentum tends to carry the driver, and it's going to naturally kind of tend to happen here. So watch out for that. Unfortunate, neither driver's fault. It's just an incident that can happen, which you need to be careful of there. Again, waiting now to pass until the second corner here after the S's. All right, so one more lap here in this section. So in turn 2, I have not gotten anywhere near the opportunity here to pass on the right. So I've just barely caught up to him in his braking zone, and I'm now getting close to my braking zone. So what I'm going to do is kind of stay behind and wait for him to make his move into turn 2. Now, as I kind of went to the inside, I'm sure that indicated to him that I wanted to pass on the inside, so he gave it to me there. He didn't have to. It's really it's an option for him to stay wide and give me the inside line there. If you're an Audi driver and you see Nissan come up to you here like I did here, that doesn't necessarily mean get out of the way. That's really just getting prepared to make a pass and waiting to see what you're going to do, really. And so I'm gonna wait, and I'm not gonna force it, and just see what he does here. So he actually does hold up and give me that inside line. So, and I don't recall if there were any communications in the race. This was from last season, so I think that might be the last. Let me double check here. This is another pass after the S's. Getting a little better at approaching that as the race goes on. So this is an awkward spot to reach. The Audi does slow up in the mid-corner point here much more than the Nissan does. So if you catch them right at this point, it feels like you've got plenty of momentum to pass on the outside. But what you don't realize is that the Audi's momentum is already carrying him wide at this point. And so if you make a late pass to the outside, he may not be able to react to that in time. He can slam the brakes, and he can end up maybe locking him up and still slide into you. And so at this point, it's really better to slow up and pass to the inside. So be careful in that situation. And obviously the timing will differ every time, based on your pace, the Audi's pace, and where exactly you reach him. So that can be a point to be a little bit tricky there. But all right, so let's jump to lap 20. Once again, this Audi driver is going to go ahead and yield the driving line, and he's going to brake and move over to the right. So I'll recognize that and move on by. Outside pass around this carousel turn. Move up through lap 21. So after the final corner, he's going to stay to the inside. So it's going to look like maybe the outside might open up, but despite that, he may actually still also run wide on exit to the right. So you've got to watch for which side of the road the Audi will choose here before you can commit to a pass. Actually, you can see I lifted on throttle just a bit because I wanted to be sure. And so he left that opening for me. And now we've got one more example on lap 23. So I think at this point I was just being cautious. This is the final lap of the race, and this is a pretty quick Audi driver running good pace, and so I wasn't going to force a pass. Now this is the situation where typically I would try to pass on the exit of 3A, which is the top of the hill here, but he has good pace through there, so I don't force it. I'm just going to go ahead and be cautious. Final lap. I think I'm going to show some examples of a pass there. So this is the point where, like I showed earlier, a collision can occur, and if I had it to do again, I would have gone a little wider here and given him a little bit more space. This was pretty risky, actually, now that I'm going back to watch that, is that the road comes in pretty quickly to the left, and so it's harder to run much wider than I did here, but I actually would have tried to give him just a little bit more space, or maybe use just a little bit more caution, because this really is right at the point where he would typically maybe run a little bit wide, and that, again, like maybe accidental, and then you're going to have a collision there on the final lap of the race. So that was actually a bigger risk than I realized at the time. All right, I think that's the last example here. Okay, so I've got an example in, let's see, the turn I wanted to show you on 3A. So you'll notice that he'll pass on the inside of the top of 3A here. So you can complete the pass here. You will be alongside in the braking zone prior to turn in, so that's safe to do. And this Audi driver was smart to follow him through instead of trying to fight for position there, just to wait and let him get through first and then follow him through. So there's that one other example. So that completes the lap guide of Sonoma. Hope this is helpful. Talk to you later.